All right, for those who haven't been with us lately, that we're spending 9 months working our way through the Bible, tracing the thread that connects all these stories from Genesis to Revelation. So a couple weeks back, we started with creation, right? All things were created good, but things break down quickly. God didn't create robots, He created people that had free will. The disobedience is the risk you run when you give someone a choice. So the consequences of this disobedience is a life where we have pain and suffering, not what God intended, but it's the reality that we all live in, right? So no sooner do we start down this path that God begins the process, though, of bringing us back, of redeeming His broken creation. And that's what's going to drive our whole story from that moment. So on our timeline here, we started with the event of creation. Then last week we went to the person of Abraham, right? One person, one promise, that through Abraham he would have many descendants, as many as the stars, and the whole world would be blessed. And the promise then gets passed down through the generations. And so we're going to quickly move through Genesis. We can't certainly tell all the stories, but we go from Abraham to his son Isaac, to his son Jacob, to his son Joseph. All right? And we're going to work our way, we're going to sort of fast forward through these stories. I really encourage you to pull out Genesis and read these stories that bridge in between the preaching here. If you haven't read them recently, they're great stories. It's sort of like a soap opera, though. It's talk about drama and dysfunctional families. This has got it all. It's all right there. But today we're gonna jump ahead 4 generations, from Abraham all the way down to Joseph, and this is going to wrap up the book of Genesis for us. So 4th generation. Joseph is Abraham's great-grandson. Anyone got great grandkids? All right. So Abraham was the great-grandfather. Joseph was his great-grandson. And so Joseph was one of 12 brothers. One of 12. Helped that his dad had 4 wives at the same time. All right. He didn't want to. He wanted to marry his cousin Rachel, and we're not even going to go there. But his uncle tricked him into marrying his other cousin, Leah, first. By the time he gets the dowry raised to get the cousin he wanted, he had been there 15 years, and this big competition between the sisters ensues about who can produce the most kids. They bring concubines in the picture to get their tally up, and anyway, it's a mess. But favorite son from the favorite wife was Joseph. All right. So from Genesis 37 here. Jacob loved Joseph more than he did any of his other sons, because Joseph was born after Jacob was very old. And Jacob had given Joseph a fancy coat to show that he was his favorite son. So Joseph's brothers hated him and would not be friendly to him. One day Joseph told his brothers what he had dreamed, and they hated him even more. Joseph said, "Let me tell you about my dream. We were out in the field tying up bundles of wheat, and suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles gathered around and bowed down to it." His brothers asked, "Do you really think you're going to be king and rule over us?" Now they hated Joseph even more because of what he said about his dream. Okay, today Joseph is what we call a spoiled brat, all right? And his brothers wanted to kill him, literally wanted to kill him. So let's read on a little bit here. One day, Joseph's brothers had taken the sheep to pasture near Shechem, and Father Jacob said to him, "Go find out how your brothers are doing, and then come back and let me know." But before Joseph got there, his brothers saw him coming. They made plans to kill him. They said to one another, "Look, here comes the hero of those dreams. Let's kill him and throw him into the pit and say some wild animal ate him, and we'll see what happens to those dreams." Reuben heard this. Reuben's the oldest. Reuben heard this, tried to protect Joseph from them. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Don't murder him or even harm him. Just throw him into this dry well out here in the desert." Reuben planned to rescue Joseph later and take him back to his father. When Joseph came to his brothers, they pulled off his fancy coat, and they threw him into the dry well. As Joseph's brothers sat down to eat, they looked up and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Now, who are the Ishmaelites? We sort of skipped that part of the story as we were rushing through Genesis here. Great-grandpa Abraham, remember, he's the one who God promised he would have an heir, but he had to wait a long time for that promise to be fulfilled, and he sort of slipped in the middle, that he sort of gave up on God and decided he might help by having a baby with somebody else other than Sarah. The result was Ishmael, firstborn of Abraham. He becomes the father of all those today who would call themselves Arabs. They'll trace back their lineage to Ishmael. And they share the claim to the land of Abraham as the firstborn son of Abraham, just as the descendants of Isaac do. Anyway, Ishmaelites showing up. Their camels were all loaded with all kinds of spices that they were taking to Egypt. So Judah said, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and hide his body? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not harm him. After all, he is our brother." And the others agreed. So they sold him into slavery, right? Many years pass, and there's a big chunk of Genesis we can't read here, but all these adventures of what happens as a slave as he ends up down in Egypt. He gets falsely accused of rape by his master's daughter, ends up being thrown in prison, and is forgotten there. Many years go by. But because of his ability that God gave him to be able to, with dreams, to have dreams and to interpret what dreams mean, he eventually is brought into Pharaoh's court. And he rises up through the ranks, and pretty soon is second in command. And successfully helps the country deal with a terrible famine that came onto the land. Well, this famine ends up covering a wide area, and Joseph's family realize that they need to come, they need food as well. And so they come to Egypt as refugees looking for food. And they meet Joseph, but they don't recognize him because he looks like an Egyptian now. And they weren't expecting to see him. They thought he was probably dead somewhere. A life of slavery, it can be very hard and brutal. But Joseph recognizes them, and so he messes with them for a while, jerks them around. Eventually, he reveals himself to them and invites them to come and to live with him down there in Egypt. So they pack up everything and they immigrate. They move from Canaan down to Egypt. But eventually, Jacob, Joseph's father, dies, the father of these 12 sons. And that's where we're going to pick up our story again. Joseph's brothers said to each other, "What if Joseph still hates us and wants to be even with us for all the cruel things we did to him?" So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before your father died, he told us, 'You did some cruel and terrible things to Joseph, but now you must ask him to forgive you.' And now we ask, please forgive the terrible things we did. After all, we serve the same God that your father worshipped." When Joseph heard this, he started crying. Right then, Joseph's brothers bowed down to the ground in front of him and said, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said, "Don't be afraid. I have no right to change what God has decided. You tried to harm me, but God made it turn out for the best, so he could save all these people as he's now doing. Do not be afraid. I'll take care of you and your children." We'll pause the reading there. I mean, wow, what a change. Through the years, Joseph, the spoiled brat, learns something, right? Through all these struggles and humiliations and the injustices that he experienced, he develops some empathy, some humility, some compassion. He develops a deep trust and faith that God was with him. At this point in the journey of self-discovery, he realized what his brothers had intended for evil, God was able to turn around and use it for good. God's love is more powerful than our failures. If you're looking for a thread that follows through story after story in the Scripture, it is that God's love is more powerful than our failures. So what about us? Does God still love and work that way? Definitely. And there's things that happen in life that we just that we just don't understand. I just shake my head more times than not. Tragic accidents, senseless violence, marriages that fall apart, people who get cancer, jobs get lost, dreams and hopes get crushed, and it seems as if God is absent. The Bible is peppered with laments, people crying out that life is unfair. Their lives are falling apart. They're wondering, where is God? Why doesn't God do something about this? It's always been that way, right? I'm sure this is how Joseph felt as he was slaving away, falsely imprisoned. But he was in time able to see that God could take even the worst that happened in life and bring something good out of it. It was a marvelous self-discovery for Joseph to be able to see that picture. Now, I don't believe that God goes around causing bad things to happen in order to teach us lessons. And I would never suggest that to someone, that God was giving them a struggle so that they might learn something. I wouldn't tell them that unless I was prepared to get slapped, right? But I've seen again and again how God is able to do just that. How God is able to redeem and restore brokenness. But if you're going to connect the dots, I would leave that better to the person who's going through the suffering in good time to be able to find and see that picture. But the story continues. All right, so Joseph and his family now live in Egypt. But it's not a happily ever kind of story. Within a couple generations, a new Pharaoh arises who doesn't know Joseph and what Joseph did and who are all these people, and takes a tougher stance on immigration and says these people will now serve us and be our slaves. It will take 400 years living in slavery before their prayers of freedom will be answered. But that's the thread we pick up next week. All right. So let's sing a song. It's based on the scripture reading we had from Romans, Romans chapter 8, and so we'll sing the chorus. The verses are a little odd; they have different rhythms, and so at least for this first week, I'll sing them for you. You can hear how it goes. But you guys come back and join in on the chorus. We'll do about 3 verses of this Psalm 62. Neither death nor life. Let's rise as we sing.